Hello, I'm Dr. Alla Kamerdiner. Welcome back to Discrete-event simulation. This is part B of Lecture 19, Statistical Analysis of Output from Terminating Simulations. We already talked about comparing two scenarios. Now, in this part, we're going to talk about comparing many scenarios using process analyzer called PAN. So we will talk today about how to evaluate many scenarios, not just two scenarios, but many scenarios with process analyzer or PAN. And as you remember, last time in part A of Lecture 19, we discussed how to evaluate two scenarios. And we used output analyzer. So this is different because we're gonna be able to analyze more than two scenarios. And with output analyzer, we were able to only analyze two scenarios at a time. So the process analyzer allows us to compare more than two, say 3, 4, and so on. And so with many more than two scenarios to compare, two problems are. First of all, the simple mechanics of making many parameter changes, making many runs, keeping track of many output files. And the second problem is that statistical methods for drawing valid, useful conclusions are also necessary. And so the process analyzer available as one of the ARENA tools addresses both of these problems. And to start the process analyzer, we will need to use the program files. And these program files have extension .p, and they're produced when our model file, which has an extension .doe in ARENA, when we run this file, the program file with the extension .p is produced. But you can also just check it, right, or compile it, and it will also produce the .p file or a program file. So it's important that you will not be able to use the process analyzer until you generate this program file from your model file. And then you can start PAN or process analyzer from ARENA. And so as you remember, when we talked about output analyzer, I said that it cannot be started from ARENA. It's a separate application that has to be started outside. PAN is more convenient because we can actually start it from ARENA using the Tools menu. So we go Tools and then scroll down the process analyzer, but we can also do it through Windows as well, just like we did it with output analyzer. And PAN runs on its own, and it's separate from ARENA. It's a separate application. So when we look at this, we're gonna have multiple scenarios. And so we need to understand what a PAN scenario is. A PAN scenario is a combination of a program file, .p, which, as I mentioned, is produced when you run or check your model file, .doe, and also a set of input controls that you select. And these input controls can be chosen from variables and resource capacities. So you need to think ahead of what kind of changes you want to make, right? What will be your input control to define those variables. And then you fill in specific numerical values. And also there is a set of output responses that also selected by you. So you can choose it from automatic ARENA outputs or your own variables. And the values for output responses are initially empty, and then when we run the scenarios in the process analyzer, they're gonna get filled up. So when you look at the scenarios, in order to create a new scenario in PAN, you're just gonna double click and get the scenario properties dialog, and then specify name, the .p file, the controls, and the responses. And I'll demonstrate to you how to do that. And then you also look at values of controls, initially as in the model, but you can also change them in the process analyzer. And this is the main usefulness for this tool, that it allows us, rather than having to manually change that in Arena and create a new model in Arena, you can actually do it through PAN, and it allows you to do that more efficiently. As you remember, when we looked at comparing two scenarios, we ended up saving two models and then running those two models separately to create the output, and then looked at the output separately. Well, the process analyzer does all of that for us automatically, just building from the P file, and then you can change the values of controls. It will automatically change it for you and create new scenarios. Then another thing that is also necessary in order to create a new scenario, we can duplicate scenarios, right? So when you duplicate, and then that creates the exact same scenarios that you just duplicated. So you got two similar scenarios, right? They're exactly the same. So you can't just leave it like that. You need to edit it to create a new scenario out of that old scenario. So then you'll have two different scenarios. And so you think of scenarios as a row. So let me go ahead and demonstrate this. But let's also discuss regarding the projects, right? So the project in the run is actually a collection of scenarios. So when we analyze just two scenarios, right, we could have combined them. We could have done it with a PAN, and we can combine both of those scenarios into a project. And the program files can be the same .p files or .p files from different model .doe files. And again, controls and responses can be the same or differ across scenarios in the project. Usually will be mostly the same. And then you can think of the project as a collection of scenario rows or a table. And that will all make sense as you see my demonstration. And then you can save this project as the file with extension .pan, and that's your process analyzer file. So again, we can select scenarios in the project to run, and we have this advantage because the process analyzer will run those selected models for us automatically with precisely specified controls. And as it runs, it will fill out the output response values in the table, and I'll show you that. And that's basically equivalent to setting up, running them all by hand, but it's much more efficient because it's much easier, faster, and less error prone. So what we're gonna do, and how I'm gonna demonstrate this, is we're gonna create this model 6.5 for the process analyzer experiments. So again, this new model will be based on model 6.4. We're just gonna remove the output file entries in the statistic module because we don't need those anymore. The process analyzer will take care of it for us automatically. So we don't need, we'll still have the statistics in there. We're just gonna remove the file entries. And so, as I said, right, the PAN will keep track of outputs itself, so will be much faster for us, and we will be able to analyze more than just two scenarios. We'll keep the 110 replication as it was, unchanged. And so, to do that, we also start PAN, new project, double click for scenarios, and we'll have for this, right, for the first scenario, we'll have a base case, and we'll choose the program file for this model. So it's important for us to first, right, either check or run it. So let me go ahead and start demonstrating this in Arena. So here I have my model 6.4 that I'm going to be changing into model 6.5 into my folder. And so now that it's changed to 6.5, the next thing I want to do is do the changes for the statistic module. So I'm going to click on statistic module, and I'm going to scroll down to where my output statistics are. So as you recall, we had two output statistics for total cost and percent rejected, and we compare different scenarios based on the total cost and percent rejected because these are the output measures that we are interested in. And so now that we don't need these output files, I'm just gonna get rid of them. I can select them and then press delete, and now I don't have the output file anymore, as you can see. And I do the same here. I'm gonna click, then I can just say Ctrl A or select the whole thing and delete. And so now, right, I don't have the output files, which I don't need them because I'm gonna be using Process Analyzer instead of Output Analyzer. And so now that I did that, I do not have, of course, if I were to open this, right, this is my file, and look for the P files or maybe all files, I can see that I don't really have, right, I have some of the P files for 6.4. Right here I have for basebook.p, right, because I ran it. For my model 6.5 that I just changed, I only have the corresponding .doe file, but I do not have the .p file that I had for two of my scenarios, right, the base scenario and the extra scenario for model 604. So to create that, right, so I'm going to cancel that. I just demonstrated you this, but to create that, I could run or check, right? So I can check the model here. If I click check the model, it of course spends some time to create this, right? So it also tells me no warnings, no errors or warnings in the models, that my model seems to be correct. And then when I open it again, and again scroll down to, well, this one did not generate. So let's just, to be sure, let's just run it, right? So to make sure that we have that .p file created, we can, and again, let's check whether my run control is set to batch run, because the batch run is the fastest, right? So run control, batch run, no animation. So I'm good to go. So I'm just going to click on go. Right, this will run it for me. I just accidentally clicked on colors. I don't really need that. So as you can see, right, you can see these are the replications that it's running, right? I left it at 110 replications, and that's what I want. So it takes time to get to 110 replications. So do I want to see results? No, I don't. I just ran it only so that I have this .p file. So when I open and check, well, maybe it did create because I didn't select all files. So maybe the check did create that for me. But right now, right, I can actually, because I didn't change it to all files when I looked it up back again, it was selected. So now that I look at it, it's certainly created it, right? So the check probably would have done it. Oh, the name is extra book. I really should have not saved it as an extra, because there, so see, that's why, right, so recall, right, what I did is I used the extra model. I don't want that one. Instead, I want, so I'm just gonna change this and demonstrate it again with a different model, right? So I'm gonna stop this, right? And this is extra, so there's extra resources. So one way to do that, I could actually save it as, right, either leave it as it is, right, and change my base model, or I can do the changes to this. So let me instead just open the base model, right? So I want the base model here, and in the base model, again, I did not make the changes, right? So let me save first file, save as, and then change this to 6.5, right? So what I didn't do correctly first time is I didn't select the base model to change, but instead I changed the extra model to 6.5. So let's just keep it as without any base, just book, and then save, and then I can delete the other model later, but I want to be using this one. So I'm gonna save it like this, and then again in my statistic, because this one has not been changed, I need to go back and I need to scroll to the output files for my two output statistics, total cost and percent rejected. So very quickly, I'm gonna repeat the actions that I demonstrated earlier and delete this, and also delete all of this. And now there's no output files there, and that's exactly how I want this, right? So I'm gonna save it, and again, if I do this open, I could see, right, that now I also created this 605 book though, right? So maybe I don't need the other ones. Well, it is open, right? So I could actually close it first and then delete it. So let me open this again. So I don't want any of the files that are associated with the extra one. So this extra, I can delete this file, of course. But this one I want to keep, and for this one I do not have .p file, right? I show here all files, not just the model files with the extension .doe, but I don't have my p file, so you know what I need to do. I just need to run it, right? So again, run or just even check the model. So let's just check the model. Okay, and then as you can see, if I open this, should have .p now, right? So I have the 6065 for model 6.5, and now I have .p file, right, which is our program file. So I'm just demonstrating that this is have been done. I have done this, and again, why I wanted the basic because, right, the basic has the trunk capacity at 26. My variables are all zeros at this time, right? The additional new sales and so on. In the other one, we had it set at 3. So now that I got all of this done, right, and finished the way I want, the next thing I can do is start my process analyzer. So I'm gonna click on Tools here, and then scroll to the process analyzer, or pan. And so this is starting my process analyzer for me. And so now I have the process analyzer. I can start a new project, right? So by clicking here, this creates a new project for me. And before I did that, it didn't have any projects. So alternatively, I could just click on File and then New, and it also creates a project file for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this as the process analyzer file, and this is going to be in a new folder in my models folder. So it's going to be a new subfolder called process analyzer, and I'm going to call it project 1. Wow. So it's a somewhat of a long name, but that name will work for us. And so the next thing I want to do is create my scenarios. So I can double click here to create a new scenario. So this is going to be my base scenario. And to attach a program file, I'm going to click and browse to my model65 book.p that I just created, and so now say OK. So now this tells me my program file. And I can also add the controls and responses here. So let me review first what we're gonna add. Actually, before I do that, let me also show how to duplicate it. So I can actually duplicate the scenarios. So by clicking, by clicking here, I'm able to duplicate the scenario and create this, and then I can go in by double clicking on it, or by clicking scenario properties. I can change this into a different scenario. So again, I could rename this as scenario 2 or something and change it into scenario 2. And so on. So here are the controls that we're going to look at. So we're going to have 6 controls. All controls will be having the same data type, integer. And among those 6 controls, we'll have the resources, and we'll choose capacity of trunk line. We also select some of the user specified, and these will be our variables: new tech 1, new tech 2, new tech 3, new tech all, and new sales. And the responses, right, both from user specified that we will have our total cost and percent rejected. These are our output statistics. And we could also do a design experiment with PAN for more efficient study of control effects and interactions. So here I'm back to my process analyzer model, and I'm going to add some controls. So I could do it in multiple ways. I could either click on scenario properties and insert controls or insert responses, or I can click here and say insert and then control response. And so either way, it would right when we do that, it would produce this dialog box, and then in the dialog box we can choose controls among resources, system, variables, or user specified. And so I can go here to resources and first select my trunk line as a resource. And as you remember, it's important to also indicate the correct data type. So I'm going to change this to integer, right? And it was real, but now it's going to be integer. And then I'm going to say OK. And now it produces this control, which is a trunk line, and I can add additional controls. So here I'm demonstrating it in a different way. I'm inserting a control. Here it's not going to be from resources, it's going to be selected from user specified. And so I can select the new cells, for example, and the data type is already selected as integer. So I'm going to have new cells with data type integer. I'm going to say OK. And then some more controls. Continuing like this, we're going to add user specified new tag. Also make sure this is integer. And then another new tag from user specified, new tag 2, integer as a data type. And then selecting more, I'm going to insert control, user specified, new tag 3, right? Again, making sure the integer is selected, right? If I accidentally selected it as a real and said OK, right, it would produce this, which doesn't make sense. I can go here, right, and I could change the control properties by clicking control properties and then change it to the integer. And so even if you did something like this, you can still edit it. And then we can insert another control among the user specified. So clicking here and then selecting a new tag O. And this is also going to be integer. Right, so I'm making sure that this is correct. So now I got this. And so I got all of this. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add some responses. So that can be done very similarly. So I can either click here and say insert response. And then my responses are both going to be from user specified. And this will be the output. So we're going to have total cost. And actually, I want to edit the total cost, so I can do response properties. And here, I'm going to have 2 decimal places. I can say OK. Or I could even change it to, right, no decimal places if I wanted to. Right, so the total cost is going to be an integer. And then the other thing is gonna, so again, let me double change it back to the 2 decimal places. And then I'm gonna add the percent rejected. So also insert response among the user specified and then scroll down to total rejected calls. Actually, no, that's not the one I wanted to select. I want percent rejected. My output. So here, right, this is output percent rejected. And this is also going to be 2 decimal places. So again, right, total cost, user specify output, and this is percent rejected, user specify output in my model. So now that I am done with the responses, the next thing to take care of is to add the scenarios, right? To take a look at the scenarios that we want to produce. So let's review of what type of scenarios we want to take a look at. So of course we're gonna have some scenario that is going to represent our base case. So we already created the base case, and now let's take a look and review at which non-base case scenarios, what type of non-base case scenario or experimental scenarios we're going to have in this model. So we're going to have the following assumptions, right? We assume that we have this budget of $1,360 more per week for additional resources. And so we also want to spend all $1,360 on a single type of resource. So we then getting the following options, right, or following scenarios. We can add certain more trunk lines at $98 each. We can add 4 more of any one of single product tech support people at $320 each. And of course, that part has already been built in model 6.5, right? You remember that when we created it in chapter 4, right, we added those, or actually 5, we added those additional outputs, right, in our output, so the total costs are included, right, include all of these, right? So we could have 4 more of any of the single product tech support people, and we have different type of tech support, right, 1, 2, and 3, or we can have 3 more of all product tech support people at $360 each, or we can have 4 additional salespeople at $340 each. And so you can see, right, this is one scenario, there's 3 scenarios here, 1 additional scenario, and another additional scenarios. So we have those additional 6 additional scenarios that we need to introduce. So let's go ahead and do that. And to do that, we're just going to be duplicating. So we're going to duplicate the base scenario to create 6 more project analyzer scenarios. So we're going to right-click, duplicate scenario, edit the fields, as I will show you. And we already saved it under a different name, so we'll just keep our name that I already introduced instead of naming it as experiment 6.5. And then we're going to execute scenarios, right? And that's easy, right? We're just going to select which ones to run by clicking on the left, Control-click, and Shift-click. And then, right, we can click on this or run Go or F5. That also will work. So let me go ahead and demonstrate how to do this. So here, as you remember, I have already created 1 additional scenario. So I'm just gonna go ahead and continue doing some of this. So I'm gonna insert duplicate scenario. So I duplicated the scenarios. And I can move those around as well. And again, I could duplicate additional scenarios. So as you can see, if I only selected 1, it only creates an additional scenario here. And so I could, I already created 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 2 more. So I'm selecting all of this, not all of this, but just 2. Oh. And then by pressing Control, I can actually continue, and then left clicking, I can actually get duplicate scenarios, and duplicating 2 more additional. So let me go ahead and first edit this scenario. So I'm just going to click on scenario properties and change the scenario from the base scenario to extra trunk lines. Trunk lines. And I can also go here, and because it's because I need to change the number of trunk lines from 26, right? Because if I didn't, it would just be the same. Just simply renaming it doesn't really make it different, right? Unless I selected a different program file or introduced some changes into controls. So my program file is still the same, but with the extra trunk lines, I want, instead of 26, 13 additional trunk lines. So 26 plus 13 would make it to 39, so I need to increase my trunk lines to 39, and I clicked here and increased it, but the rest remains the same. So then I click here and edit this. So I'm gonna go ahead and, so I left-clicked and then scenario properties from this and change this to scenario as the extra tech 1 scenario. And then say OK here. And here, of course, I need to also make some changes because otherwise it just would be the same exact scenario as the base scenario. So here I can find my new tech 1 and I can change it to 3. And this will be my extra tech 1. And now, actually, let me go ahead and change, so I don't want too many names. I'm just going to save it as base. This one, I'm going to rename it as extra trunk lines. And this will be a little shorter for me, so let me go ahead and change this one as well. And this one, so scenario properties, I'm gonna change it into extra tech 2, and this will be extra tech 2 scenario. And because it's extra tech 2, I need to go here and change the control to 3. Actually, I'm not correct. I should be adding 4 additional, so I'm gonna go back here and change 4 because I have 4 additional single techs and 4 here. And the next one is gonna be extra tech 3, so I'm gonna rename this as extra tech 3. And because this is extra tech 3, I'm going to go here and change it to 4. And then for tech all, I'm going to create a scenario as well. And this is going to be extra tech all. And so I'm going to edit it, put this here as extra tech all. And notice right that it says 4, so I want to change the control properties here to make sure that it's integer. Let's see. Alright, so now the next thing I want in extra tech all, I want to add additional 3 new tech alls. So I'm going to change my control to 3 here. And last but not least, I'm going to add this final scenario, and this is going to be the scenario representing extra sales. So I'm going to name it extra sales. And here too, I'm going to name it as extra sales scenario. And more importantly, I need to change the control for new sales to 4 additional new sales. And so now, right, that I created this, right now I have saved also my .pan or process analyzer experimental file, the next thing I can do is run it, right? So I click here and this will run it. So notice right now there are 0 replications, and also the responses are empty, they're not populated by anything. As I click run, this will change the number of replications and also populate the responses for total cost and for percent rejected. So let me go ahead and click on go. So right now my selected scenario is 7, so let's just cancel this. I want to select all of them, so I could click on all of them, keeping them control. Now all of them should be selected, and I could click go, and that will run the whole thing. So you can see in the goes, now the selected scenarios are all of them, right? So this will, and if I wanted to show the assignment summary reports for them, I could click here, but I don't really want that. I just want the all of my scenarios to be ran. If I only selected one, then I would do it individually and have to select and run individually, right? But I want to run them all at once, so I'm gonna say OK, and it will start running. So as you can see, right, it started with a base, just like it's listed, and it's running the up to 110 replications, so it will finish running, and then it produces, right, so it finished and produced these responses, as you noticed, and now it switched to the next, the extra trunk lines. It's running up to 110 replications, just like we indicated in the program file. And so now, right, in the model file, and so the program file also created for that. So as soon as it runs to 110, it then produces these responses. And so again, right, it runs through, I'm gonna produce 110, switch to the next one, and so on until we're done with all of it. So let's just wait until it runs and does produce this information for all the scenarios. And notice as it runs, right, all we did, we just changed those. We didn't have to run it ourselves. The process analyzer runs this for us. And this is much faster, right? We can create as many scenarios as we want. Still limited compared to maybe UpQuest for Arena, but it does allow us a statistical analysis. So you can see it finished running all of the scenarios and produced the total cost, percent rejected. So we could actually look at some of these outputs, but that doesn't really give us the statistical analysis. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how to look at the statistical analysis. So just as I said, right, we got this after we finished running it, right, we got all of them ran, but, right, what to make of all of this, right, we have the values for the responses, but it doesn't really have the statistical meaning, right? So to do that, right, we need to actually use the statistical decision making to compare those different scenarios, and the process analyzer allows us to do that. Right, so now notice that when we run it, right, we have this model 65 scenarios, right, that are made with 110 replication each. And after each replication, it produces the value for each of those two outputs, right? So we have the outputs as our responses. So we got, now after running each scenario, for each scenario, we got 110 values of total cost, and also 110 values of percent rejected. And so again, this is much better than just looking at the single replication, right? But we also need to know, right, and be able to compare these scenarios using statistically valid decisions. Right, and how do we select the best scenario? So what we can do is actually we can insert a chart in the process analyzer, and this can be done either by inserting a chart where you saw me inserting the controls, right, and inserting the responses. I can also insert a chart, or I could click on this button. And so what it will produce, it actually, right, will produce depending on what type of chart I select. So I'm going to select the chart type box and whiskers, and the box and whiskers chart actually help us understand, right, the statistical values, right, that we get for different variables. And in this case, we're going to be looking at the total cost. Right, so we're going to select total cost, right, as our variable that we're going to chart, and then we can click identify best scenarios, and the process analyzer will automatically do the comparison, right, which it will look at the differences between different scenarios to compare those and find, right, again, right, what is the best scenario. But we need to indicate what we consider as the best scenario, right? So in this case, in terms of total cost, we want to minimize the total cost. And so we're going to select smaller is better. And we can also choose the error tolerance. So we're going to set the error tolerance to 0. And then we're going to also check the show the best scenarios and finish this. And this will produce the chart for us. And we also will repeat the similar things for % rejected. So let me go ahead and demonstrate this in process analyzer. So now notice we are back in the process analyzer. So we finished all of our scenarios, right? We got all of them completed. So we could actually insert the chart. So I clicked it off, right? And now I can and now that I have this information, right, I also have this button here to insert the chart, or I could click on insert, and then the chart is available for us. So let me first do it through this insert and then chart. And then I can choose, right, to compare the average values, right, or compare the replication values of response for a single scenario, right? So I want to compare the average values of response across the scenarios. And I'm going to select I could select a different kind of part. So I actually want the box and whiskers. So notice here I actually selected both of these responses, and so I don't have the box and whiskers type of chart that I wanted. So let me cancel this and select just a single response. So again, right, I just can click out and then select total cost. So I'm selecting total cost, and I could either do insert charts through here, right, or I can click on insert like I did before and then chart, or again clicking on this. All those three options would produce the same thing. So let's, right, so important part is now I selected, instead of both of them, I only select a single response. Then I can insert the chart, and here I do have, right, so you notice there are some additional charts, high, low, and box and whiskers that are now visible from this dialog. And so I'm going to select box and whiskers, and then again, right, I want to compare my average values of response across scenarios. And so next, right, I'm going to look at these scenarios, right? So I'm going to selecting all of my scenarios, and then my category X will contain scenario name. So here, this is the response that I'm going to plot the total cost. And so I could change the title names if I wanted to. And then I can also choose, right, which ones to select, right? So these are, so I'm going to include, so I'm going to check identify best scenarios. And because my total cost, I want to minimize it, the smaller is the better. And here's my total error tolerance, right, which is quite large. So I don't want this error tolerance. I'm going to set my error tolerance to 0. And I'm also going to click on Show Best Scenarios. So right away it tells me, right, the base scenario and extra sales seems to be the best scenarios, right? And I'm going to say Finish. And as I click on Finish, it will produce here a chart. So I'm going to say Finish. So you can see now I got this chart here, which says total cost by scenario. And notice also now this chart also includes this total cost by scenario. I go click on it and it will open a single chart for me, right? Or I can make it invisible, right? And so again, right, another thing that I want to do is I also want to do this for percent rejected. So let me click, right? So now I selected percent rejected. I click here, I can say Insert Chart, or I can just leave it as selected and either click here, Insert, and then Chart. Oops. Or I can click on this and select Chart. So now I click here, again Chart, because I selected this single one. It now has the box and whiskers in this high-low, right? So I'm going to select box and whiskers. I'm going to compare the average values across scenarios, right? Just like we compared means for 2 with output analyzers, this is doing a similar type of comparison, but for all 7 scenarios, right? For many scenarios with a process analyzer. And so now, right, I'm going to have this additional response, right, for percent rejected. So next, yes, of course, I want to only select the percent rejected, so I'm going to deselect the total cost for now, and then say next, and so it's going to be my chart percent rejected by scenario. Next, I want to identify best scenarios, and for percent rejected, again, we want to minimize the number of rejected customers, so the smaller is the better. And again, I'm going to set the error tolerance to just 0, show the best scenarios. And so you can see these two, the extra trunk lines and extra tag all, will improve our percent rejected. And then I click Finish. And now, right side by side with my total cost, it also produced the percent rejected. Right? If I wanted, I could make these larger, which that's what I want to do, right? So now by making it larger, I can see it easier. And the same with this one, right? I also want to enlarge this chart. And so now, right, it's much easier for us to see, right, where different scenarios fall, right? You can see that extra trunk lines, in terms of the cost by scenario, is actually the worst scenario, right? Seems like, but the extra trunk lines achieves a much better percent rejected, right? But also extra tag all seems to be good, and the extra tag all, of course, it's not as good as base and extra sales, but it seems to have a moderate total cost. So maybe if you wanted to look at both and total cost and percent rejected, then extra tag all might be one way to go, right? Of course, the base for in terms of percent rejected is pretty high, but the base and the extra sales, right, are the best in terms of the total cost. So as you can see, this process analyzer is very useful tool, especially because, right, imagine us trying to do a bunch of comparisons. We would have to compare each scenario to the other scenarios, right, using statistically valid comparisons. So we would need to do a lot of those pairwise comparisons using output analyzer, but the process analyzer does all of this for us and produces these statistically valid results, right? So notice here, some of these scenarios here, they seem to be similar in terms of total cost, but right, they're in blue, they're not the best, right? They're not the best. The best ones are the base and extra sales. based on our data. And so, but the extra sales and the base seems to be very comparable, right? Both are the best ones in terms of the total costs. They cannot be really distinguished, and we can't really say which was our extra sales or the base is better. But you can certainly see, right, that it's smaller, right? So in terms of the difference that you would get in total costs, it's more robust scenario with having extra sales. So now that I showed you how to do that in Process Analyzer, let's look again at the results, right? These are the results that have been produced, right? So to understand it better, right, the vertical boxes are 95% confidence intervals, and the red scenarios are statistically significantly better than the blue ones, right? And that's what I was explaining. And so more precisely, the red scenarios are 95% sure to contain best one. And to narrow down the red set, right, more replication, or the error tolerance, right, more than 0. And so you can see more of this information about how to narrow down and select which out of the two ones that we got is the best. You can look in the ARENA textbook for more information and more details about that. So again, it's important to remember, right, these numerical values, right, that we get, including the confidence interval half-width in a chart, right? You can click on a chart, right, to see the chart options and data. So if you look at the best scenario, just like what I described before, right, when we talked, this actually, right, these two different objective functions, the total cost and percent rejected, right, they don't agree, right? When we decrease the total cost, the percentage rejected, as you can see, seems to be much higher. And the other way around, right, if you do this, right, that we might increase the total cost. So if we do try to combine them somehow, then as I mentioned, possibly new tech holes would be the best scenarios to combining the two of them. But if you want to do that, right, we could also introduce a new output where we combine those two and then do the comparison, statistically valid comparison, using this new output measure that combines the percent rejected and the total cost into a single objective. So this is the end of Lecture 19, Part B, and as a Lecture 19 overall. And next time in Lecture 20, we will talk about OptQuest and how to optimize. And this will be, of course, useful. This is a very useful tool, as you can see, the Process Analyzer tool that we just learned about.